Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Value Add. I'm your host, Jan Lucanis from ReelwUrld, and these weekly events that we have, wonderful Q&As with our network, our wonderful network of high achievers, high performers that have tools that have allowed them to reach amazing heights in their particular area of expertise. And by sharing those tools, we all benefit. So that is the purpose of the value add, to add value to our lives. And today we have Mark Hiraide. And I am so excited because Mark is a dear friend. He is a Tai Chi practitioner. He is a real world general counsel and so much more. And I'll talk a little bit about how Mark and I met in a bit. But Mark, thank you so much for being here with us. We love you so much, and this is just so great to have your time like this.
You're welcome, Jan. My pleasure.
Awesome, man. Well, I want to share a little background with it so everyone gets gets to how we're connected. So I was at Tech Day in New York in 2017, and it was my first time there. And I was about to leave and I saw this big stage, and there were two people on stage, and Mark was one of them. And for some reason I had this sense that I should sit down. I think I saw a logo that was for MSK, and I know that law firm because Stephen Crone is a wonderful advisor and friend, and like personally for years, since I was like in my early 20s. And Steve and I knew him from the Hollywood and Games Summit, and he was at Village Roadshow at the time, overseeing stuff like The Matrix as the chief operating officer. So I knew the firm because Steve was at that firm, and I saw Mark, and I'm not sure if he mentioned Tai Chi or if I mentioned it when he came off the stage, because I let him know that I knew Steve. And when I did, he said he trained Tai Chi. I'm like, well, I coach the U.S. team, and it'd be great if you and I could come together and train. And I'm not sure if it was that evening or it was the evening after that I had a class, but he surely showed up to class, and great form, great posture, and I was and just immediately felt a connection to Mark, and it was just so wonderful having him in New York.
Wow, come on, Jan. You were a lot more modest when we first started talking about Tai Chi. You didn't mention the U.S. team at all, and you said, "Yeah, I do a little martial arts." And so I'm thinking, yeah, this is another guy who does a lot of martial arts and knows everything all about martial arts. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. And I don't even think you mentioned your participation in the U.S. national team, but you did tell me that you had a class, and so I was thinking about going to your class. And I thought, well, who is this guy? I better Google him to make sure he's legit. He's not going to do a Zumba class or something. So I Google him, and sure enough, this guy doesn't tell me all this stuff about him. And anyway, so I am so happy that we had that opportunity to meet. And the funny thing is, in 2017, crowdfunding was only just beginning. It was in its infancy. It was a year old. And imagine that from then to now, you told me you were going to start a company and embark to do a crowdfunding, and here we are.
Thank you for reminding me how that I did not mention the U.S. team experience. How nice of me. How quaint. Well, again, and Mark, that you say so much there. Your statement is incredibly loaded with wonderful stuff that we need to unpack today, because it's very much, you are instrumental in ReelwUrld being where it is today. If it wasn't for you, I don't think we'd be here right now, honestly. And so it's huge to have you on. And in 2020, in 2020 we reconnected. We were reconnected several times since we met in person in 2017, but in 2020 there was a clear marker where we were getting ready for a big Comic-Con event and promoting what we're doing with Justice for Hire as our first show produced for the community. And you're like, hey, you need some representation. And we're like, you know what, we do. You want to do crowdfunding? You know what, we do. So Mark supercharged us. And Mark, I really, for those who are new to to the concept of equity crowdfunding. I want to talk about equity crowdfunding. I want to talk about Tai Chi. I want to talk about all these things and how and your vision, how these things interconnect in your life. But for those who are new to equity crowdfunding or may not know about it, can you tell us in 60 seconds what it is?
Sure. Equity crowdfunding is selling ownership of a business, a company, to the public, to the crowd. That's it in a nutshell. It can be used to raise capital, so for that business. Also can be used as is, I know, a big part of Jan's purpose, to provide ownership of the company to a community that could be a community of consumers of the product or a community of followers. But without equity crowdfunding, there's really no way to disseminate ownership of that business and company to the public. We can go into the reasons why, but believe it or not, before this law called the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act in 2012, but crowdfunding really didn't become law until 2016. There was really no way for entrepreneurs to cost effect the company to the public without going through a very expensive registration process with the SEC. So it was a little more than 60 seconds, but that's crowdfunding in a nutshell.
So this is amazing to me because of when I saw when I saw Legion M, that they're the ones who really turned me on to the concept of equity crowdfunding in 2016, because they were preparing, and they were fairly, if I remember correctly, they're fairly public about how about their gearing up to build a company with fans, from I think March of 2016 through their launch in like mid-May of 2016, with their first equity crowdfunding campaign. And they of course went on to and they're buddies of the ReelwUrld crew. So we're very inspired by them, but they went on to be the first company to raise over $1 million using the instrument of equity crowdfunding. So I'm wondering, Mark, from what you've seen to date with this spirit of being able to allow the crowd to own a piece of a company, of something that they believe in, and help it grow financially by providing the fuel to get to a larger vision. What is your vision for equity crowdfunding? Like what is the highest goal? Because we're still so early, and it's still so young, and people still may not even know it exists. So what do you think, where do you think things can go with equity crowdfunding?
And I'm sorry, Jen, you cut out there for a second. What the first part of your question was?
Oh, the first part was what is your vision for equity crowdfunding, and what is the highest goal that you think it can achieve?
Okay. Well, so my vision for equity crowdfunding is to enable entrepreneurs who historically have not had any access to capital, to be able to raise capital, seed capital, to validate, an idea, a business model, and then go out and raise more capital. And the reason that wasn't exempt before crowdfunding was, the laws regulating taking OPM, other people's money, in the form of investments or selling a part of a company, were really restrictive. They're the same laws that are still on the books from 1933, the 1933 Securities Act, which Congress enacted in response to the 29 crash, the Great Depression. And so the laws in regulating raising capital from investors were very, very strict. Before the equity crowdfunding, you could not publicly advertise the sale of a security and raise money from the public without registering it with the SEC in a process that is the same as going public, doing an IPO, which has become a very, very expensive process. So it basically precluded people who didn't have contacts with wealthy individuals with whom they can solicit without doing an advertising, it precluded those people, those entrepreneurs who didn't have those kinds of relationships and contacts from raising seed capital. And so the benefit in my vision of crowdfunding is it kind of democratizes, to use an overly used word, democratizes capital, makes it available to theoretically anybody. And as long as you comply with the rules and the investor understands what they're investing in, then why shouldn't entrepreneurs be able to access capital, harness the power of the crowd and the support of the crowd, and build a business, create jobs, and that are going to drive the economy.
Mark, Vintage has a question, but before we jump to Vintage's question, I have I just want to point out something that you said there. You spoke of a company that may not have historically had, or entrepreneurs that may not have had historically had access to capital. This entrepreneur, using the equity crowdfunding model, then has access to capital from the crowd and can utilize that capital to validate a business model. And then once that business model is validated, this is how I perceived your words, then they go back out and can raise more capital from the crowd. And that seems to me very much the model that we've witnessed from some of the most successful companies in the equity crowdfunding space.
Yeah, early on, there was a lot of criticism or question whether equity crowdfunding was going to be viable. And a lot of people would say, well, venture capitalists aren't going to want the companies to junk up the cap table, so to speak, with hundreds of, investors. And I remember early on, I was on a panel with a VC and he said, that's not our concern. In fact, he said that if the company is successful in doing an equity crowdfunding raise, even the dollar amounts that they don't raise are significant, that validation, if there are, 100, 200 people or more who are willing to invest something in the company and become a part of the company and have ownership, a vested interest, in the company, that to us, to the venture capital, traditional capital sources, is validation. And if you have that kind of validation in your community and they're willing to support you by making small investments, then, that gives the venture capital or institutional investors real confidence that there's something there to the business model.
Thank you for packaging that together for us, Mark. I want to jump to Vintage with your question.
Yeah, so I'm not sure your knowledge on the blockchain and NFTs, but I'd like to ask if you do. It sounds very similar, like equity crowdfunding and what's going on with NFTs, and I was wondering if equity crowdfunding is on par with NFTs, or are there like certain pros and benefits to one or the other?
Yeah, excellent question. And I recognize you from I recognize you, so it's nice to meet you. Of course, everybody is now familiar with digital currencies, blockchain tokens, cryptocurrencies, and most recently NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And so what those all are digital representations of really an asset. And what we're talking about, equity crowdfunding, in the context of a traditional stock equity investment or a common stock, is very similar to what's being sold with an NFT, for example. But the NFT is just a digital representation of the right that we're talking about. So there's a big controversy, as you probably know, whether or not NFTs and cryptocurrencies are, quote, securities, and whether they should be regulated as securities. But in my mind, in most cases, the NFT, especially in the case where the NFT in fact is a security, it's really just a digital representation of the common stock or the preferred stock. In the case of ReelwUrld, they're selling preferred stock, we could very easily, and maybe we should, we could very easily create a digital representation of a share of preferred stock, that physical share certificate, and put it on a smart contract and make it an NFT, so that the owner actually no longer owns a right to a physical certificate, but they own digitally a non-fungible token. It's not fungible. It represents that particular stock certificate number 869 for 450 preferred shares of ReelwUrld. We can do that. And so, but it adds another level of complexity. But I hope that answers your question, because I think the gist of your question is you're sensing that NFTs are very much like securities that are crowdfunded, because the way NFTs are sold are very much similar to the way securities are sold. And in fact, the big legal issue is, do you need to comply with all those securities laws in selling NFTs or other digital securities?
Right, and that's actually what I wanted to touch upon too, like the tax part of it. You know, do you have anything to share regarding that?
You know, I'm not a tax lawyer, and by no means a tax expert when it comes to digital securities. That the IRS probably treats NFTs and digital assets just like any other real world asset. So, you know, they're gonna, it's kind of, and they analogize it to the sale of a stock and the gain you would receive on a stock. So they probably apply the same rules. From what I've read, that's the case.
Now, I don't know how raw I can get on here, but I don't prefer to pay a lot of taxes because I don't really support my money going into like wars and stuff. And so that's why I'm asking that as well. And I feel like there are ways with that regarding the privacy coins, such as Monero, Pirate Chain. Yeah, just to throw that out there real quick.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I understand that, you know, part of the allure of cryptocurrencies is it's like, you know, in some sense, it's kind of, you can view it as a peer-to-peer transaction. And, you know, and so in that sense, you know, people feel like, well, look, if it's a peer-to-peer transaction, there's no need for a central government. There's no need for an intermediary, a private intermediary like Facebook, you know, and so there's really no need to tax me because I'm not using, you know, a central government infrastructure. It's just a transaction between, and the blockchain allows me to do a peer-to-peer transaction kind of anonymously. And, you know, that's on the other hand, I think the argument goes that, well, you know, we need the government to provide some sort of infrastructure, if nothing else, law and order. And so talking to a lawyer, of course, the lawyer is going to say, well, you know, we need to pay our fair share of taxes to support our roads and infrastructure.
Thank you, Vince. Those are great questions, and I'm super inspired by this concept of NFT NFT like little stock certificate. That's awesome. I definitely want to talk about that on the side. That's really super interesting to me. But also, you know, want to stay super focused too. But Andra has some questions as well. So let's jump to Andra.
Hi, Mark.
Hi,
just had a hi. Good to see you. Just had a quick question, and in my head, it's could we think of the valuation of a company and the number of shares? The shares are practically the valuation broken down into shares. So a share is practically the equivalent of an NFT. I'm just of the digital representation. So if we were to think of ReelwUrld as a blockchain already, and how its valuation is represented, what would be the equivalent of a share in a crypto space? Wouldn't it be a token? or
Yeah.
and broken down in NFTs. I'm just thinking of the parallel between how you structure a company and how you structure the blockchain. I mean, this is for a later brainstorming session, but I think this is very interesting to just understand the traditional company and a blockchain company and their valuation.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, the short answer is that the token, and people call them security tokens. If the token is, as I was describing it, a digital representation of a classic security, which historically has been represented by a physical paper stock certificate, then there's a, in terms of your question on valuation, there's a one-to-one correlation between the value of the share and the value of the token that represents it, because the token is identical to the share. It's just a digital representation. But tokens, as you know, can be used for other purposes. Unlike a share certificate, you could use a token like a Chuck E. Cheese token. It can have utility, right? Similarly, kind of similar to a publicly traded security, a token could be publicly traded if there's a market for it. So, so there are various types of tokens. Even when it comes to NFTs, there's something called an NFT, that fractionalized interest in an NFT. And that's just simply a non-fungible token, but they sell, basically they divide up the single non-fungible token into, a lot of separate individual fungible parts so that they can trade them. Without jumping down the rabbit hole, I think the short answer to your question is, yeah, usually there's a kind of a one-to-one correlation between the token and the value of the token and the value of the security.
It's just fascinating, because if you start going down the rabbit hole, and I won't now, I'll just close and then let you guys get back to the scope of this podcast. If you go down to like how you differentiate the class A versus the class B shares and everything, you can see a direct correlation with how the token and the coin and the token is being structured. So it's just fascinating for me. The more I go into it, it's like, oh, it's that simple. So
it is simple.
Yeah.
I mean, you or the owner of that share a basket of rights. Well, with smart contracts, you can import sort of that same basket of rights and a lot more.
Yeah.
You can attach a lot of different rights to, like I was saying, the various utilities to the token. So, there's a lot of creativity that remains to be unleashed.
It's super fascinating, and we'll talk later more about it. But thank you so much, and I'll mute myself now. Thank you.
Okay.
Mark, so I think this is a great example of the type of thought leadership that you've already brought to the equity crowdfunding space, because there's stuff in here that we haven't talked about that seems like super forward thinking that I would love to talk about. So I'm wondering what attracted you to equity crowdfunding in the first place? So what made you focus on this area and bringing so much value to the world?
Well, so I'm a securities lawyer, so my job is to counsel people when they're trying to raise investment capital. And like I was saying, before we had equity crowdfunding, before it was legalized really in 2016, you couldn't, if you can believe this, and you got to think though, in 2016, the internet wasn't all that advanced, but you couldn't even, I remember having young clients say, what? I can't tell my friends on Facebook that I'm, going to do a securities offering. Well, no, before equity crowdfunding, like I said, you could not do any form of advertising of a investment. And the only people from whom you could raise money were people with whom you had a pre-existing relationship. And so that meant, if you're a young person and your parents didn't run around with wealthy friends, you might not have access to capital that you could actually solicit because you couldn't advertise. And so, so one of the things that interested me about equity crowdfunding was, again, how we could reform the securities laws, which I had, been practicing all of my life. I started out, as a lawyer at the SEC. I spent 8 years there. I left. I went into private practice and counseled clients how to comply. And I just felt that these, especially during the dot-com ascendancy and the innovation over forms of communication over the internet, I felt like these antiquated laws needed to be updated. So I got very involved, and eventually, some of the folks from Congress reached out to people like me in the trenches and asked me my opinion about things. And as a result of that, I got invited to testify before the Senate Banking Committee about risks, investor risks in this new form of financing, including equity crowdfunding. And then eventually I wrote some legislation that was just enacted at the end of last year in California for specifically for California equity crowdfunding.
Mark, this is I always wonder what is the core driver for a person, because what brought you into law in the first place? Like, how did you feel that was your call?
Well, I just well, one reason for sure is that I'm a third generation Japanese American, and so my parents were born and raised here. They were put into camps during the World War II, and they never really they didn't talk about it too much, but I could tell there's a huge hurt as a result of this huge injustice. I used to look at my dad's yearbook, and he went to Uni High, which is in West LA, because he grew up in West LA, just before the war broke out. And I could tell, first of all, his first name is my middle name, Toshiro. And everything was signed Richard. Or Douglas, I'm sorry, Douglas. So first of all, he changed his name. He adopted a more anglicized name. And I could tell he was trying to be the all-American kid. He was playing football. He was a member of all these clubs. And then for the government to basically say, you're not American enough, and so I'm going to send your family away in a camp because we don't trust you. You may be spies. That, I could tell really hurt. And so it was partly a sense of feeling like, well, I'm going to study the law so that if anybody ever tries to pull anything like that at least I'd know my rights. And, I think the same thing was true with my parents. And so that was probably a principal motivator. And then, as far as crowdfunding goes, again, I felt like people ought to be provided, disenfranchised people ought to be provided with an opportunity to raise capital. And because without capital in our society, without capital, you can't create businesses and you can't generate and create wealth. And that's the reason that historically, the wealth has been concentrated in the hands of a very limited class. And so kind of to spread the wealth and to spread the joy and to promote all of these great innovative ideas that Americans are known for, we needed to capitalize these young growing companies and then let the cream rise to the top. And then financial institutions can finance them in the more traditional way, but at least let's give an opportunity to everybody to create something and realize their dreams.
Mark, with doing my best to be as respectful to the story that you just told and the challenges that were that you identified. As a kid growing up in the comic book business, that's very much a superhero origin story in terms of having the understanding and the need for justice, having that catalyzing, the catalyzing moment that makes you say there needs to be justice in this world, and then leading you to a place of really helping to bring an instrument to so many people, to the world that showcases a way to balance out our society from a financial standpoint of powering the businesses that we believe in, and like you said, spreading the wealth, spreading the joy, and I think that really ties. I can see how your Tai Chi, how some of the Tai Chi principles tie right back into the just everything that you're doing. So that's very, very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm wondering, do you find your martial arts principles consciously going into your work in that way?
They definitely do. Whether they're conscious or not, I'm not sure. Although it reminds me of a story that a very good colleague and friend of mine, who's a Tai Chi practitioner, he was telling me about. He's a city attorney, and the first time he was in court, how this judge, and judges really don't treat, a lot of judges don't treat lawyers very well, and he all of a sudden he got in his mind the concept of focus, and really and he really focused in on the judge, and his mind was very clean and calm and clear, and from that point on he was able to very articulately do whatever he had to do without worrying about anything else, about fear of failure. And so I know that kind of focused thinking, and in order to get that into that state, and I don't know if it's conscious, but in any stressful situation, if you're in combat Tai Chi or competition, in any competition, it's very stressful. And so if you don't by nature incorporate the relaxation that you need to execute movement, you can't perform. And so similarly, I find the same when I'm doing my job. Somebody's yelling at me and screaming at the phone, or the judge is trying to beat up my client. I think all of that training, just as it kind of comes, it comes to you.
So Mark, can you tell us a bit, what brought you, did you grow up training? Like what brought you into the training so we can have both of these layers?
Well, so I didn't really grow up. I mean, I grew up, I did a lot of hard martial arts, karate, when I was younger, and I literally broke a couple bones. And then when I was probably after I left the SEC, when it was about, probably almost 30 years ago. So I was in my mid 30s, early 30s. And I felt like, well, okay, I'm getting too old to do competitions, karate competitions. I'm getting too old to do hard karate. I always thought I'd want to do Tai Chi, just to continue a martial practice. So for several years, I studied Tai Chi, but ironically, I reached that plateau where I felt like, I really need to understand the applications of these Tai Chi, not to do the applications, because I really wasn't aware. I wish I had been aware of the competitive aspect of Tai Chi sport. I just didn't know about it. But I felt like I needed to understand the applications to enhance my form. So I ended up driving. I live by the beach, and I drive an hour each way down to Rosemead to work with a practitioner from Taiwan who just did nothing but Tai Chi, Xingyi, Bakua applications. And so, for every Saturday we throw each other around, and that's when I really came to appreciate the art, because it's really so much more than, as Jan knows, it's so much more than just the technique. There's an entire conditioning of the mind to have that kind of sensitivity to the opponent and the intentions of the opponent, expressed or not. You need to develop that sense of sensitivity, and that's kind of what piqued my interest and continued my interest, because it would be interesting if it were, you know, forms and kata and technique, you know, joint locks, and that's all fun and that's all fun. But to me, it's that higher level of training, which really focuses, like I was saying, the mind and the sensitivity to the other person and the other person's intentions, which, you know, I think serves you well in anything you do, right? Assuming that you're not a hermit and you don't have to interact with people. But as long as you're going to be interacting with people, to have that sensitivity to the other person's intentions and energies, that's you know, that of course is at the levels that are way beyond me. I think Jan is probably approaching that level, but it's way beyond me. But you know, the journey to get there is really rewarding.
Mark, thank you for sharing that. And we have a question from Autumn. Pin you can.
Hey, Mark. Thank
Hi,
you for
Autumn.
being here.
Sure.
So I actually read somewhere this week that the total amount raised via equity crowdfunding is around 300 million, and you probably have a better number on that, so please correct me if that's totally off base. But I was wondering if you could give some background behind that number and touch on how you think the crowdfunding space will grow and expand in the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent question. I think that number is correct. I think the SEC has been tracking it. So equity crowdfunding, when it first came online, like I say, in 2016, the maximum you can raise, a company could raise in any one offering was $1 million. Well, last year, the SEC increased that limit to 5 million. So I think that increase in limit to 5 million is really going to be a game changer. You know, when you think about it, equity crowdfunding is still in its infancy. It's only been less than a year. It was May of last year that you could raise more than $1 million using equity crowdfunding. And so the whole infrastructure, capital raising infrastructure, investment banks, you know, they were not geared toward raising money through equity crowdfunding. And I think what I'm seeing is a whole ecosystem that's coalescing around equity crowdfunding. So what do I mean? So for example, it used to be the case that you could not get an investment bank. If you're a company, you could not get an investment bank to act as a placement agent. In other words, they're introducing you to their, you know, valued high net worth clients. You could not get an investment bank involved in your offering unless the offering was at least $2, $3, $4 million. And the reason was that the fees weren't high enough for the investment bank. But what I'm seeing now are investment banks that are starting to get into the equity crowdfunding space. And there are more financial intermediaries that are participating. I mean, it's a little bit ironic in that part of the legislation was intended to, quote, disintermediate Wall Street, right? And allow companies to go directly to investors and raise money without having to go through Wall Street, without having to go through an investment banker. But I think one thing people realize is that that's still not easy, even though the law may allow you to do that. And even though modern forms of social communication and social media allow you to reach out to investors, you know, the old adage, securities are sold, they're not bought, is very true. And there was a reason that there was a whole market industry around Wall Street, around these financial intermediaries, because, you know, to raise a substantial amount of money and to hold an investor's hands, companies don't have the time or resources to do that. You need a financial intermediary that's incented economically to do that. And so it's a little bit ironic in that, you know, kind of the people who were the grassroots initially behind crowdfunding wanted to democratize capital raising, wanted to disintermediate that, but we really need that. And so to get back to your question, Autumn, I think that I'm seeing that evolve, that industry evolve. And so we're seeing kind of more traditional Wall Street get involved in equity crowdfunding and raise capital that way. You know, at the same time, I also see companies like ReelwUrld who have large constituencies who want to be able to, users or followers, constituents who they want to be able to give a piece of ownership or provide an ownership stake in the company. And that's what crowdfunding does as well. It allows the ReelwUrld to reach out to its community and say, look, we want you to be a part of us, own a part of us, be an owner with us in this venture, and have a vested stake. And then that only serves to validate, like I was saying earlier in this interview, it only serves to validate the business model of ReelwUrld, and then ReelwUrld will take that out to the more traditional investment banking community and say, look at this validation that we have among our community, and this is the reason that we think our valuation is what it is, and has an opportunity to become much greater.
Quick follow-up there. As we've touched on many times, one of the advantages of equity crowdfunding is that it's more accessible. Do you think there's still room for, is there still barriers to entry in the equity crowdfunding space that exist? And how can the space improve on being even more inclusive?
Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, there definitely are. And the barriers to entry are just simply information at this point. I mean, there is a little cost barrier, which my legislation tried to address in California. I eliminated what in California to raise a small amount, 300,000. I eliminated what was the largest out-of-pocket cost, which was the requirement to have a review from an independent CPA. But aside from that, the initial cost of doing a crowdfunding, which primarily is the few $1,000s that you're going to have to pay a CPA to get the review, there isn't a lot of out-of-pocket cost. And so what we really need to do to promote crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding and its use is to educate the public that there is this whole infrastructure out there, and the portals play a major role in that because the law requires that they provide education. And so part of what they do, and they have a financial interest in bringing in companies to utilize their services because they get a commission on the on the sales of the securities that the companies make on their platform. They have a vested interest in portals in kind of holding the hand of the entrepreneurs and helping them comply with all the requirements, prepare all the documentation, helping them with tips about how to market their offering. I think they play a significant role and will continue to play a significant role in educating the community about how to raise capital.
Yeah, even if when I search Twitter to kind of learn more about the equity crowdfunding space, it's kind of clear there is still kind of a stigma around equity crowdfunding compared to like traditional forms of investment. And I'm curious, like, what do you feel like are the most common misconceptions about equity crowdfunding?
Well, yeah, so there are a lot of people who think that, well, okay, if you can't raise capital from traditional sources like angels, for example, then you're going to resort to equity crowdfunding. So equity crowdfunding, it's the bottom of the barrel. And I think that's the furthest thing from the truth. I think that, Jan could very easily, with his understanding and our ability to articulate the business value proposition, could easily raise seed capital from angels. Problem is, angels notoriously want a huge piece of your company. So that's one issue. But more importantly, I think, and I know Jan's philosophy behind the company, it's really to provide an owner interest to his community. I mean, he wants the community who participates and really is integral to the creation of his business. He wants his community to be able to have an ownership stake. And so, so he's going about raising the first raise in that way. It's almost as if equity crowdfunding allows us to take investment in the form of human capital, human involvement. And then with that, we will hopefully go out and raise more capital from more traditional sources. But that's one one, I think, misconception about equity crowdfunding, that really it's only good for people that don't have the resources or ability or wherewithal to go out and raise money on their own from more traditional sources. But there are a lot of downsides to raising money the old-fashioned way, even assuming you have the connections. There are a lot of downsides to doing it that way, and as I mentioned, a lot of value to bring on your community as equity owners.
Thank you so much, Mark. I love everything that you said. And of course, you have a wonderful book on equity crowdfunding, but if you have any other resources that you think could help educate people, you can either shout them out now would be great, or tell us afterwards and we can kind of blast it out to folks who are interested.
Yeah, well, so certainly WeFunder has got a pretty good resource, information, educational resources on their website. Because like I say, the portals are actually required by the Jobs Act to provide investor education. So there's some good resources on WeFunder. There are also good resources on the other portals as well. I think that's a good place to start, WeFunder as well as the other portals. There's probably, I've been thinking I really should start a Substack or something just to get the word out, to make it in a very organized, simple way. How do you do an equity crowdfunding A to Z? And just
I'm waiting for your talk, Mark.
Well, I'm trying to get the word. As a matter of fact, just today I was on the phone with our lobbyists who worked with us to get the legislation enacted, to figure out ways how to get the word out about our legislation. So we're talking, we're going to set up a meeting with the SBDC, small business development companies. Those are SBA funded, state funded development centers that provide business, resources and education to entrepreneurs at no cost. We're going to talk to them about getting the word out about how to do an equity crowdfunding raise. And so that's kind of next on my goal. Now that it took me so long to get the law enacted, I really want to get the word out so that people understand how they can use it and how they can raise capital.
Mark, we have a question from Ryan, and let me pin you guys.
Hey Mark, how you doing?
Hey Ryan, good to see you.
Good. Sorry, I missed the first bit, but
Yeah.
but I've known about you before. Hopefully, it didn't miss too much. But always impressive chatting to you. But yeah, and I saw it Ernst & Young, like how much they focused on trying to get into the crowdfunding kind of space, and you have things like Rise at Barclays they do, and different investment banks that try to get into it in different ways. And you're right, I think it's kind of the same thing with CEs, kind of taking a piece of ownership which away from. But one thing I love about ReelwUrld is the two-way street you have with the content being created by the community, so they're buying into what they're feeding, if you like. So I think there's a really attractive proposition with this. I think the steps taken, as you said, to get that market cap beyond the $1 million to $5 million, I think is a big game changer in making these things take off. And I wondered, my question is really, how do you see kind of the cryptocurrencies and kind of that kind of technology and that kind of different way of really, currency in essence, really, how does that currency kind of play into this, and how can it be with the NFTs and stuff like that, I've got the acronym wrong, I think, I'm sure, but where you essentially purchase a piece of art or purchase a piece of this with Bitcoin, that kind of thing. How can you see those kind of worlds coming together, if at all?
Absolutely. In fact, the first question was that question exactly, and so I was describing earlier.
I can go back and listen to it.
Well, no, the relationship, it just goes to show you how important this is. But the short answer is, especially for ReelwUrld, I see tremendous possibilities for ReelwUrld to work in the digital currency NFT space, as you probably have identified. what I was saying earlier is an NFT is simply a digital representation, most of them on, either one of the two Ethereum standards. And so it's a smart contract, in essence, a smart contract that is a digital representation, can be a digital representation of a share certificate, but it can be so much more. It can embody, so many more rights. And so you can bundle so many rights. If you're Nike, you can, you can, you can do all kinds of things with the shoes and the products and the consumers and provide all kinds of incentives. With a token, you can provide the economic incentives that you can provide to somebody. Music distribution company, music companies that produce music, any company that produces content, they're going to be on the forefront of using NFTs. Eventually it's going to be used in every industry, of course. But right now, I think its most obvious use case is with content. And so it's very exciting, I think, what ReelwUrld will be able to do in the digital crypto NFT space.
It's great the work you're doing too. I mean, I know so much about how much on the list of slides you're working. You're working on the stuff, and it's very impressive and good. Thank you. It's great to open these doors. Really helpful.
Well, thank you. Well, we appreciate your support, and without people like you, we would never be able to get these ideas off the ground. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. And for those who don't know, Ryan's our lead investor for ReelwUrld. Great to have you here, man. And Mark, thank you so much for is there anything else that you'd like to share on your vision, your journey through equity crowdfunding, through martial arts, and just as a human being that you feel that we can learn from? I'm sure you're, as I did in my social post, you're an ocean of wisdom.
No,
sure if you saw that.
I didn't see that, but all I want to say is that I've come to know Jan now for several years, and I've practiced Tai Chi and martial arts with Jan for several years now, for at least a couple years, very consistently. And because I myself, as I mentioned, have been involved with martial arts for so many years, I feel that I'm, while I may not be the greatest practitioner, I have enough knowledge to understand those who have really achieved very high levels. And I've met a few among all the many martial artists that I've met a few who've achieved a very high level, and Jan is one of them. And I don't know that, unless people, it's hard to evaluate martial artists, I believe, and that's probably part of the reason why so many. I mean, one way is to compete, and you can be validated that way, but martial arts goes beyond that, so much further beyond that. And Jan has, and is striving to reach those levels. And I can see that translates directly into everything he does in every aspect of his life. But, more specifically, the ones I'm familiar with are his business life. And as I get to know Jan as a friend, I see that, with his friends and family, he brings that same level of excellence to anything he does. And so I have no doubt that if this can be done, he's going to be able to execute and do it. And, I was telling him that when it comes to investing, people always, like in real estate, they always say location, location, location. Well, in investing, it's the people. And VCs tell me this all the time. It's really the team and the person that they're investing in. And so I just want to say that, not just to brag about Jan's Tai Chi prowess, but because I'm not sure that everybody can appreciate that level. And I'm not just saying it because he's a client or because I like practicing with him, but I can see it in the way he articulates the concepts and his generosity in trying to convey and teach and bring along people like me with him on that journey. And so I have no doubt that that same level, we're going to see that same level in the management of ReelwUrld, and that really applies to everybody. Autumn, Andra, the entire team, from what I've seen, is just at that level of excellence that I have no doubt that they're going to be able to execute, and it's going to be a joy to go for this ride. So thanks, Jan, for letting me participate.
Mark, thank you for the kind words and for being so wonderful as yourself. And before we finish up, Andra's got one more question.
Yes.
Yes, yes, Mark, because how a very successful entrepreneur said, you cannot look forward without looking back and connecting the dots. When I hear you speak about the practice of Tai Chi, and if you would to connect it to equity crowdfunding, what's the one practice that helped you get to the level of performance that you are at in your job? I'm very interested lately into practices from all different domains that get you to the level of where you are, like writing laws for the country, and Jen competing for the US national team. What would be the one, because there has to be something, the common denominator between equity crowdfunding, writing laws, and Tai Chi. So I'm really curious if from the top of your head you can identify one.
Well, I think that that's a tough question to identify one. I guess it has to be that sense of calmness to be able to yield and react to circumstances that you can't foresee, yet at the same time you have to have enough skill to be able to anticipate to the best that you can something that's going to happen that hasn't yet happened. And so I guess all that says is that whether it's equity crowdfunding, whether it's practicing law, whether it's competing in Tai Chi, you have to develop the mind and the body, and you have to train to acquire those skills and knowledge. And that's a never-ending process, but you need to put that work in, and that will enable you to react in whatever field you're in the best and most efficient way, and be able to carry you through and accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. That's kind of how I see it. I never really thought about that question. So.
Well, you can think now, and I'm looking forward to discuss more later. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Andra. Thank you, Mark. And Mark, I wanted to, for everybody, I just had to throw my little 2 cents on that one, because I think you mentioned one thing that I feel oftentimes people are looking for, because we're in a culture where you have religion, and then you have I'm spiritual, or you're an atheist. Like you have all these I'm this or that, and then you have the concept of building, which we all are building ourselves. We are the architects of ourselves. But I find, and you touched on in your response, that having a discipline, specifically a system that you can continually reference, is absolutely a key component of being able to gauge your own growth. And for me, it's Tai Chi, and there are other things that plug into Tai Chi. And so when it comes to the desire to have a singular tool, I often find that I can only utilize a singular tool from another expert because of having a foundation in a particular discipline, and being able to continuously reference that and to say, oh, this tool is similar to this concept in my discipline. Okay, wow, this is a different way to look at that exact concept. Now I can supercharge my thing even more and keep building my machine, And so I just think it's a really, really important thing when I speak to people who may not necessarily have have chosen a particular discipline in life to stay very focused on, or who may have chosen one for, let's say, work, but haven't found one to help them through other aspects of living, through just simply being physically healthy, etc. I think that having that system, that lens through which you can view the world, and then have the world and these various tools as reference points for things that you're already touching, it can be very, very valuable. So I just want to throw that in there and get your thoughts on that, Mark, in terms of your ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree with that. For me, it was all about kind of becoming the best lawyer that I could be, and getting those skills. And maybe I can analogize that to, kind of perfecting one of the styles or one of the systems in a martial art. And I felt like I needed to, before I went and did, before I went into grappling, or, started doing Taekwondo or some other art, I felt like I just needed to really do karate, even though there were lots of appealing arts out there, and a lot, and I think I hear what you're saying about getting a good foundation in something, right? In something, and in my case, in my career, there were lots of other things that I that were attractive, a lot of shiny things. There was, entrepreneurism, maybe start a company, a lot of other things. But I really wanted to hone my craft and become the best lawyer that I could be. And that meant to me to not only do transactions, but to do litigation and get experience in the court. And, I felt like I actually didn't start out at the SEC. I worked for 2 years in a law firm right out of law school. One of the reasons I went to the government is because I felt like that was the only place I could really get intense experience, and that I wouldn't get that in the private sector, maybe at all, or if I did, it would take years and years for me to get that experience. And so in that sense, Jan, I think, yes, having that foundation in a particular discipline is so important, and you can always fall back on that, modify it, take the best of other systems and incorporate that into what you've been able to develop, and utilize that without being spread too thin.
Last question. You said entrepreneurism, potentially start a business. What would that business have been? Or what might it be?
I don't know, just hard to say. I have such an interest in finance. It probably would be some fintech related thing, something to, again, enhance people's entrepreneurs' ability to create businesses, and something along those lines.
Mark, thank you so much for being here and sharing so much. And thank you everybody for attending with great questions. Love you, man. We're so grateful for you. Everyone can find Mark. Well, I don't know if do you want us to share your Instagram? So you can see my.
No.
What's the best place for people to reach out to you, Mark, if they have questions, thoughts, ideas, etc., that they would like to continue?
Well, LinkedIn. I at least I occasionally looked at my LinkedIn. I never looked at my Instagram, and I almost never look at Facebook. So I'm ashamed to say that, but LinkedIn is someplace that I try to look at it occasionally. They can always email me or call me, but LinkedIn is a good place because their messaging system actually is pretty user friendly.
well, everyone, you can find Mark Hiraide on LinkedIn. Mark, thank you so much for joining us for episode 2 of The Value Add. And we're going to be doing this every week. So thank you so much, guys. And everyone, if you can, train with Mark, because Mark is actually, he's hiding. He's actually very high level Tai Chi. So,
my class was tonight, so I just came directly from class. Didn't have a chance to change either. So I apologize for that. But
hey, do you teach it in person or online?
well, I don't really teach, frankly. I don't consider myself qualified to teach. I lead a group in Hermosa Beach, and since COVID, we've been doing it online. So happy to have anybody participate, but it's tough to call myself a teacher when there are people like Jan out there. So.
Well, I don't call myself a teacher. I call myself a coach for the sport. Everything else,
okay.
Well, always trying to gather new information.
Okay, I'll call myself an assistant coach.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. Love you guys. Everyone, check out the ReelwUrld website. Check out the ReelwUrld's equity crowdfunding campaign at wefunder.com/ReelwUrld. That's ReelwUrld. Of course, reach out to Mark on LinkedIn. Everybody on here, you can see their names. They all have an amazing story. And so research them and check them out, because you'll find some amazing things. Love you guys. And I'm going to press stop on this now.